Welcome, everyone, to our Zowe office hours designed to focus on Zowe v3 for Zowe users. I am Rose Sikach, the Zowe onboarding squad lead. I'll be kicking off this session, and I will be transitioning it to Mark and Sean and several other presenters today. Just a reminder, if you are a Zowe extender and you missed the office hours series focused on extending for V3, please visit zowe.org/vnext and you will find the recordings for that series of meetings on that page. This office hours, however, is going to be focused on the Zowe consumer, or another way of saying that would be installers, administrators, or users, any user of Zowe really, and offer all of you a deeper understanding of what's happening with V3. We started the series back in early January. As you can see, we've gone through all of the components, all of the core Zowe components. Just as a reminder, we introduced, or will be introducing, two new core components with Zowe V3. One is the client node SDK. The other is the Zowe Explorer for IntelliJ. This week, however, we're going to be focused in on systems install and packaging, and specifically the impact that V3 will have on those particular items. As always, the office hours are meant to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions, raise concerns, offer comments, etc. We prefer that you do that in the chat while the presentation is going on, and then we'll open it up for live Q&A. As of at this point, our planned GA date will be March 28th, and we'll talk a little bit about that in one moment. So let's go over the agenda. It doesn't change from week to week. The first thing we'll do is talk about Zowe releases and what's happening with the various releases as we introduce V3. Then we'll talk specifically about systems install and packaging as it relates to V3 and what's new there, any installation and configuration changes, the user experience impact, and then we'll end it with where you can find more information in general about V3, but then specifically, which resources should you contact for the information related to the topic that we're talking about today. And then we'll have live Q&A. Okay, so with respect to Zowe releases, we start with our important dates. Our plan is to introduce V3 at the end of March 28th. V1 will be terminating support at the end of September. That's this year. So the clock is ticking there. We highly encourage all of our users. Hopefully, they've all upgraded to V2 at this time. If you haven't, please do so as soon as possible. If you are on V2 or if you upgrade to V2, you've got a long runway of support there. The community plans to continue support through August of 2026. As far as compatibility goes with V3, with the new release that we're introducing, we always recommend that you look on the OMP conformance site, look for the badge associated with your particular extension and ensure that it's there. In the event that it isn't, it could just be that the vendor has not applied for conformance and in fact has confirmed that they are conformant with the V3 release. It's highly likely that they are. The conformance program really hasn't changed all that much, but we do recommend that you verify that interoperability with your vendor. And then finally, with respect to conformance, please note that the support provider program will change slightly in that we have, as I mentioned, introduced two new Zowe core components, or will be, with V3, and therefore the vendors who are applying for comprehensive support in order to earn that badge will in fact have to ensure that they are able to support those two new core components. Okay, just another way of looking at the same information from a timeline perspective. Here we are in January, February. We expect technical previews, pre-release of the technology to be available very soon. That information will be posted at our vNext page at zowe.org. We expect to deliver the final active release, so the release that will include new capabilities and functionalities for V2 in early March. And then at the end of March, we'll introduce V3. That will become the new active release. That will be the release receiving all of the new features and functions. So customers interested in positioning themselves to receive new features and functions should consider and plan to upgrade to V3. V2 will transition at that point to a maintenance release. And the first maintenance release we expect to deliver at the end of May. And then finally, in September, at the end of September, we'll produce the final maintenance release for V1, and that will terminate support. Okay, that is it for the intro and the releases and timeline. So I will turn it over to Mark for V3 installation and configuration.
Thanks, Rose. So to kick off for this slide, I wanted to cover sort of what's new and changing in V3 as it applies to Zowe installation and configuration. I'll start with what's changing because that list is so small that it almost doesn't exist. If you recall in the past, when we went from V1 to V2, we had a pretty broad overhaul of how we did install and configuration. But from V2 to V3, we're keeping things much the same. So really, we're not going to be implementing any breaking changes as we go from V2 to V3. We're just going to be, building in continuous improvements to what we already have. So with that said, for V3, of course, we're going to have a new FMID AZWE003. This follows our prior practices with the new FMID for every major release version of Zowe. I also wanted to consolidate some of the updated ZOS prerequisites for V3. The minimum supported version of ZOS will be 2.5. This increases from V2, where the minimum version of ZOS tolerated was 2.4. For API MLs, you may have seen in their office hours, the minimum version of Java will be 17 going forward. And for Zowe Desktop, it is going to be Node 18. And more generally, of course, for Zowe Desktop, we're going to be following IBM's Node LTS model, though our support for their LTS versions of Node may lag behind by a couple days or weeks as we validate that Zowe is compatible with them. Okay, so after the prereqs, the things that we're focusing on for V3 are a couple different areas. It's supply chain security updates. Specifically, we're going to be doing a refresh of our SBOMs and of our digital signatures. Then we're going to be continuously updating the ZWE install and configuration tool. Again, this aligns with the staying on the same track and in the same direction for how we do install and configuration, but just improving it. And then lastly, we're working on a new install and configuration tool, which is a UI-based install and config for Zowe, and that is called Zen. Okay, so for supply chain security first, if anybody here is unfamiliar with supply chain security, the reason that this has come into focus was because malicious actors and attackers that are trying to take advantage of weaknesses in the software that we deploy to all of our business environments, they're shifting the way that they approach these attacks. So in the past, all the focus tended to be on the software as it lived in production and finding weaknesses in the software and exploiting known vulnerabilities. But as we've all gotten better at hardening our infrastructure and software deployments, attackers are moving to other areas to try and find weaknesses. And the area that they've moved to is trying to attack the supply chain for software that is the point between which we are building the software and we are passing it along to you, and then you are actually putting it into production. So the way that we protect against attacks against the supply chain are twofold. It's through SBOMs and digital signatures. So SBOMs are the ingredients label that you get on um, anything you buy from a pharmacy or a grocery store. This tells you everything that is used to build the software that you are going to be deploying to your environment. And it includes not just what we are creating as part of Zowe, but it also includes all the transitive dependencies. So it is every line of code that is used as part of the software build and deployment. For V3, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be refreshing the SPDX format that we used. For V2, we had a SPDX 1.0 compliant SBOM. This was, the first revision of SBOMs that were created by the Linux Foundation in response to the U.S. executive order on cybersecurity. And being a first revision, they were lacking in some features and information that are necessary to making them useful in production. So 2.2 is a strong revision that includes that extra information. And when SPDX goes to 3.x, that's the next major version that's coming out, we're also going to be supporting that immediately. It's our impression that SPDX 3. The 3.x revision is it is a major revision of the format, and it is likely to be adopted very broadly within the industry. And you're going to be able to get these SBOMs that we create for Zowe via download link from both the Zowe downloads website as well as through our docs.zowe.org. We'll have instructions in both places about how you can acquire, download, and use the SBOM to verify what you're getting in Zowe, right? And get that full transparent look into the dependencies that we're shipping. Secondly, we're also going to be using SigStore to digitally sign artifacts. So digital signatures are the tamper-proof seal that you get on anything that you buy from a pharmacy, right? This tells you that none of the software has been changed from the moment it was built by us. And not only that, it tells you exactly who built the software. So when you use SigStore to digitally sign artifacts, you can confirm both that it was the Zowe community that built the version of Zowe that you are downloading, and that the download is bit for bit exactly as it's intended to be. So in other words, this gives us tamper-proof artifacts. This is verifiable anywhere with an internet connection. And we're going to use SigStore to digitally sign everything. So we're going to sign both the SBOMs we're creating and every distribution artifact that you can download from Zowe.org. Again, instructions on how to acquire these signatures and how to use them to verify the integrity of the artifacts, that'll be available both on Zowe.org and the doc site. Okay. And for our next round of improvements to the ZWE install and configuration tool, just if you're unfamiliar, the ZWE tool that we're talking about here, this is the install CLI that we use on the server side to drive the install and configuration of the Zowe server-side components. The improvements we're looking to make include removing Node.js as a prerequisite from the install tool. Of course, this is still going to be required if you want to use the Zowe desktop or app framework. But currently, we do have some usage of Node.js in the ZWE tool, and we'd like to just remove that to shift the Node.js prereq to the runtime for the Zowe server-side component. We're also going to be having additional schema validation present. This allows this effectively shift left different errors that you may find. So what was happening before was sometimes, in your zoe.yaml file, which is your master configuration file for all the different Zowe components, you may have had an incorrect value somewhere in there. So you may have put in a number for something where we expected a string. And you wouldn't always know that that was an error condition until you actually tried to run the install commands, and then they failed, halfway through. So by having more schema validation present, we can fail faster. So if there's an invalid value somewhere in that Zowe.yaml, instead of having to wait for the Zowe install command to be halfway complete before you see it, it's going to fail right away. So, one thing to note there is, in rare cases, if you had existing working Zowe schema files, um, they may start throwing errors, but that's because you probably had invalid values in there before. So, um, where before we may have, tolerated config files that had errors in them, now we're going to be a little more restrictive. We're also adding a diagnose commands group, the ZWE tool. This just helps you diagnose different situations that you may be running into based on some error text that you're getting. Um, more concretely, what you can do is if one command fails and it gives you something like error text and an error code, you can feed that into the Zowe diagnose command, and then that'll give you more information, more context about what the error is and what maybe you could do to resolve it. And it'll always include a link to our doc site. So, if there's not enough information there for you to act on it within the diagnose command itself, you get a direct link to the doc, which has, all the potential information that you could need about that error. We're also expanding templating and system symbol usage in our example JCLs. Both of these are useful tools if you want to build, more complex Zowe.yaml configuration files that have either logic embedded in them or, access to system symbols. This just makes it easier to, deduplicate some information that you may be putting into that Zowe.yaml file. In general, also, this is just going to be faster initialization than prior releases. We're trying to make it, as quick as possible from the point where you start running the ZWE command till the point where Zowe install is complete. And, lastly, we're going to have better dry run capabilities that export runnable JCL. This is really important because we're getting feedback that some users prefer that all the actions that were being run by the ZWE tool and install configuration, which includes things like creating data sets or copying members, or like they would prefer if that was instead externalized as JCL so that they could review it and submit it, because that aligns better with their internal processes and requirements. I think that this feature could expand based on feedback in the future to more and more command groups and more capabilities. And I think Sean is going to talk more to this feature in the next few slides. That I think I'll hand it over to Sean.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So, in fact, I have a demo for this after I go through these slides, but essentially, Mark is right that we've been talking to different types of customers, and they've said slightly different things for, what processes they use in their companies, but there are some themes to the feedback that we've gotten. So one of the themes is that either they are less comfortable with operating in USS, or their workflows that they use for other products, that Zowe is just different from them, and therefore whatever workflows or automation they have can't be applied to Zowe, partially because of Zowe doing unique things under USS rather than something more standardized. So, in both ways, we've taken that to heart and we said, well, how can we solve these problems? And similarly, we've received feedback that people want to see what's about to happen before it happens as often as possible, right? And so when we considered all that feedback, one of the takeaways we got is that more things need to be in the form of JCL samples, and any automation that we might have needs to be merely an option so that people can do things in their own way if they so choose. But that if we have any automation, that it really should be backed by our JCL samples so that we can show people what we're about to do. So this is, the first part of this is, what is the as is state? In version 2, the Zowe install commands, there's two of them, ZWE install You might not see this if you do SMPE because that's done in the SMPE build step, but ZWE init you generally always see because that's what sets up a Zowe instance. But both of these, they're too reliant on shell actions, which makes them hard to review. You may not know what they're doing unless you really dig into them. They require you either using SSH or OMVS. And like I said, maybe you have some sort of workflow in your company that relies on a certain, maybe it's JCL, maybe it's something else, but the ZWE stuff is definitely unique to Zowe, so it's going to throw a curveball at your workflows. So what we want to do here is not a breaking change. We're going to make JCL samples and have ZWE use them. So the ZWE commands will do the same actions as before, but now the actions are going to be in the form of submitting jobs. And these jobs will exist at rest in JCL samples, and you can review them, customize them. You can run whatever you need to do without ZWE at all if you so choose. So this is going to open up more options for our users in that, yes, ZWE will still be there. It won't be a breaking change, but there's going to be new ways to install Zowe. So you should be able to install Zowe without interacting with an SSH terminal. Now, each of these JCL samples are, of course, things that we can view. So ZWE is simply going to be enhanced with a dry run flag for each of its commands, which just prints out the JCL but goes no farther. So that's going to be a huge improvement for just reviewing things. So what other details do we have? In the SZWE SAMP dataset, we've always had this. This contains SAMP libs today. It continues to, but it's going to have more. So people may have seen a job called ZWE K-ring before and another one called ZWE Secure. One of the feedback that we got on this is that they're just too big because they fully encompass every scenario, but that means that they encompass RACF and top secret and ACF2, and there are different options for creating key rings. And so these are very, very long samples. And what our users generally did is they learned what were the actions that they actually needed to do by reading those very long samples, and then they would just make their own jobs and execute them. So we're hoping to get closer to reality here in just splitting those jobs up into the single options that a user would do. So you'll see that there's now going to be a sample, for example, called ZWE I is for initialize, and then KR is for keyring, and then R is RACF, and 1 at the end is option 1, because in the kring sample, there were always 3 options. There's going to be an R1, R2, R3 for RACF, and you just choose one. There will be a T1 or an A1, for top secret and ACF2. Then ZWE Secure will likewise be replaced by ZWEI RACF, ZWEI TSS, ZWEI ACF2. So the end result is instead of looking at a roughly 1,000-line job, you're going to look at a roughly 200-line job because it will be more tailor fit to your actual thing that you're trying to accomplish. And if people still want to create their own jobs, we're not just going to stop with making our samples better. Making our samples better will also make it clearer to us what are the essentials that we need to document. So this doesn't just stop with making JCL better, because our users have also told us that some of their change management software is such that we could never deliver a turnkey solution to them, but what they really need is just the information for them to connect the dots. So after we improve our JCL, it'll give us clarity to consolidate our documentation surrounding that. And I think one of the end results will be doc pages which clearly list in tables, here's a thing that you need, in which order, and here is a sample JCL that you can use to understand this. Maybe that's one of the takeaways. Um, Now, going back to the JCL for a moment, when you look at the ZWE init commands today, there are phases. There's an init MVS, there's an init VSAM. So um, I spoke on the keyrings and the secure job, but turns out that the init MVS command never had a JCL. And so this is one of the things that we're fixing here. There's now just going to be one called ZWEI MVS, which does that option. And within all these samples are not runnable by themselves because they have a lot of things that you would need to fill in to do the action. And in the past, they would instruct the user to manually go and fill them in, and it would duplicate some of the content that you'd write into Zowe.yaml. So we wanted to do better than that, and we came up with a template language that allows us to do that for you. So on the next slide, I'll explain a little bit more about that templating stuff. There's this new job called ZWE Gener, and what it does is it looks at all these samples and it finds all those templates. And then in Gener, you type in the location of your Zowe.yaml. And what it does is it substitutes in the Zowe.yaml content into those templates after, of course, validating that your YAML is schema compatible. And then the result of the template resolution is placed into a second data set. In Zowe, there's always been a second data set called JCL_lib, which is where user customizations go. And so that is where we put the results of the templates. Those are ready to be run. And so you can run this ZWE Gener job yourself at any time to refresh your customization library. Or you can run the command ZWE init generate if you wish to do it through ZWE. And that's going to be done automatically for you if you just continue to run the ZWE init commands that existed in V2. It's just the first step of the process now. So I guess the takeaway here is the samplib contains portable content meant to be substituted, and ZWE generate transforms that portable content into something that's usable on a particular instance. So I'd like to switch over to demo mode here for a second, if I could share my screen.
You should be able to, Sean.
In order to, it says that you need to stop sharing, and then I can. Okay. Can you see my terminal here?
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Rose. So, yeah, what we're looking at here is the ZWE commands, and I guess one of the points of me showing this is that they really haven't changed. They're the same old commands as they always were. There's just this new subcommand called generate, and if you run ZWE init, it calls all of these subcommands in a certain order. But if you went straight for a particular command like ZWE init certificate, it's going to run generate before running certificates now. So that's really the only change, but it should be invisible to the user. But if we check any of these commands, they're also now going to have a dry run option. And what that's going to do is it's going to perform validations to say, did you fill in enough of the Zowe.yaml to actually complete this operation? Or are you about to accidentally overwrite something? So it will do all the validations, but it will stop before doing anything. It'll just print out the JCL, but go no farther. So Um, what I wanted to show you is not the ZWE and its stuff, because the goal here is sort of to allow you to work in different ways. And so I wanted to instead show the JCL side of the equation. So if you extract, you do your SMPE actions and you end up with these four data sets in a Zowe install, the samplib is where all this new stuff is going. So in the samplib, what you're going to see is there's many more samples than there were before, and that is because some of the samples were split up into parts. Here's the 9 different keyring options, for example. And here's the init MVS example that didn't have one before. So there's just more here. It's more easy to review, I would say. And if we look at the MVS example, what you're going to see here is that, sorry, my screen's a little bit messed up in this VM here, but let me try this again and see if it looks better. Yeah, okay. So you're going to see these brackets here. This is why it's a template and can't be run directly, is because this is a reference to something that would be found in Zowe.yaml. And so you need to either type in the answer yourself or run the generate command and it will do it for you. So, so this is an action that previously was done entirely in shell script, and now we've created a job out of it. So in order to turn that into a runnable job, this is the generate command. So the generate command, I've already filled this in just to save us demo time, but you have to fill in where is Zowe located here and here, and then where is your ZFS section oops, I accidentally moved content around. Let me back that out. Here, you put in some of your ZFS content. And then finally here you put in your Zowe.yaml, which could be a parm loop. Doesn't need to be a file. But when you submit this, what you're going to end up with is the JCL lib, which is not new. There's always been a JCL lib, but now the difference is that we populate this with output that's specific to you. So we're not done yet, but we're getting pretty close. You can see that we don't have as many jobs as we did in the samplib. That's because this system in particular is a RACF system, so we didn't copy over the top secret and ACF2 stuff because it's not relevant to this system. But if we look again at the IMVS one here, what we'll see is that we no longer have those brackets in this spot. Now we have real values, and those came from Zowe.yaml. So in the background, a script was run. And if we look at the script ZWE here, we're going to see that it is powered by config manager to do the validation. It is valid. And what it printed out is basically, it loaded, it confirmed your Zowe.yaml is valid, and then it did the substitutions. So now that it's ready to run, let me go in and give it a shot, right? So I'm just going to submit that one. And let's see if we got, there we go. These are the 2 additional data sets that normally get created in the ZWE and MVS stage. So sort of the point of the demo here is just that we've been able to do the actions that you would have done in ZWE solely through jobs. And one of the reasons that this is important is that in Zen, which we will show next, as a UI for installing Zowe, we don't want to hide the actions from users, so we still want to be able to show the jobs that are about to be executed. And so we needed to make sure that every action had a job. So this is all these things are interconnected. So I'll hand it over to Sakshi to talk more about Zen.
Sure, Sean. Thank you. I'll start sharing my screen, but I think we need to stop the actual sharing first.
Okay, you want to share?
Yeah,
Okay, you got it.
yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Is my screen visible to you all?
I can see it.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. Thank you.
Looks good.
Yes. Yeah, so I'll be demonstrating Zen, and as Sean said, it is the installation wizard we designed to set up Zowe on a preferred operating system. So let's get started. So we have a bunch of steps. The first of them is the connection. So here we specify the necessary details to establish a secure connection to the ZOS. So we have the host, FTP port, username, and the password. We can also use FTP over TLS. For a while, I'll go with the TLS connection. I'll validate the credentials and move to the next step. Okay, so here the next step is the planning one. Here we need to provide the job statement to match the system requirements or the configuration which is relevant to the upcoming installation. So I have a temporary one. I'll add this. I'll save and validate this job statement. Okay, so here moving further in the planning stage, we need to specify the directories which will be required for our installation. So we have bunch of attributes here, and in directories we have the runtime, workspace, log directory, and the extension directory. We also have the RBAC profile identifier and the cookie identifier, basically everything that goes into the YAML for the configuration. We also have the job name and the job prefix, yes, and the Java location and the node location. ZOSMF attributes are optional, so this is what goes into the planning stage. I will validate this location and move ahead. Okay, so validation is successful and I can continue to the installation option. So this is the third stage, which is the installation type. Here we can choose the installation of our choice. So we can either download the Zowe convenience build or we can upload. And we also have the option for the SMP installation. In this case, the SMP installation must be done outside of Zen. And here we need to specify the Zowe runtime directory from the SMP installation process. I'll go with the downloading option. We have the license agreement. I'll agree to the license and move ahead to the component installation. Okay, so here comes the important part. We have the four main stages, the sub stages inside the initialization. So first one is installation of the MVS datasets. On the very first launch of this page, we just need to specify the high level qualifiers and rest will be taken care of. There are a few things like we need to ensure that the prefix is updated to match to the system and yeah, I think basically everything that goes into the YAML. Additionally, we also have the YAML over here. Yes, the YAML has all the details that we have specified so far, like the directories and the Java and node location and other details. We can also paste or import any existing YAML here. And in that case, we need not really fill the forms that we see behind, and we can do the configuration that way as well. I'll go with the installation itself. I will initialize the installation. Okay, so since I did it just before it, so I think it's already done. Anyway, let's move to the next step, which is the EPF auth. Okay, so before we move ahead with the installation, we need to authorize these load libraries, and these libraries comes from the previous step, the all the data that we have added into the installation. I will initialize this as well. Again, this is done because I just again the same thing I did the installation before. I'll move to the security stage. Yeah, so here we need to configure the Zowe security. We can choose the security product, and we have more attributes like the security groups, users, and started task controller. Anything that I update here will be automatically updated in the YAML as well, and vice versa. Anything in the YAML, any updates in the YAML will be reflected in the forms and the main configuration. I'll initialize this and move to the certificate. So here we have the certificate type. So we have PKCS 12 and other. We have the key store directory, the certificate area's name, everything basically, the key store password and all. And yeah, these things are actually optional. And yeah, we again have the subject alternative name, everything that basically goes into the YAML. The application is still work in progress. So as of now, I cannot really initialize the certificate. So I will skip it and I'll move to the review installation stage. So this is the last one. And uh, yeah, so here we basically have the details of all the prior steps, whether the step was successful or pending. So yeah, I need to look why actually installation is pending. I'll take a look at that. And the certificate we haven't initialized yet. That's why. And yeah, so this is the demonstration. We can also move to the any step that we might want to make any changes and initialize it. So yeah, I think that's all in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
If there are no questions, then I will ask you to stop share.
Yes.
I will resume. And let's see where we're going. Okay, resources. I'll take this one. It's pretty straightforward. All of the information related to V3 is available at zowe.org/vnext. We continuously update that page with recent and relevant information, and the packaging, install, and related information will be available there, as will these slides and the recording of this presentation. As far as contacts, Mark is our Zowe System Squad lead. He doesn't use LinkedIn. He's available at OMP Slack, and he has his email address listed here. So any questions related to what Mark presented with respect to our digital certificates, SBOMs, etc., you can reach out to Mark. No, I don't know, Sean, if you have your contact information. I know Sean presented last week. His contact information is on the prior presentation dedicated to the WebUI/app framework. And then finally, we like to encourage all of you to subscribe to our Zowe-user mailing list at OMP. This gives us the ability to reach out to all of you versus having all of you reach into us on a regular cadence to check back to see what's happening with Zowe. Just makes it easier to ensure that all of our valued Zowe consumers are getting the information they need when they need it. If you're interested in joining the mailing list, there is a link right on the zowe.org page, right on the announcements line at the top. Please click on that and follow the instructions to complete that application. Okay, I think that concludes our presentation. Okay, so there's a thank you. Yes, great presentation, Mark, Sean, and Dakshi, if that's correct. And Sean has included his email address in the chat. I do want to pause to see if anyone has any questions. That was a lot of information that we shared. There are several folks on the call. Just going back to my notes. Go ahead, Bruce.
Rose, maybe it was mentioned and I missed it. While this is a Zowe V3 presentation, the Zen component, if I understand right, will also be supported for, I don't know if there's a release dependency, but some with V2 as well. Could someone comment on that?
We haven't done anything that really prevents it from being used in V2. but well, we'll have to see what happens at the end when we actually go to release it, because the thing is, like, one of the buttons that we wanted to add to Zen was to view the job that's about to be executed. And that's only possible with that JCL work that I'm doing, right?
Okay.
So it's not going to work on an older version of V2. Now, does that mean that we should code Zen so that if you're using an older version of V2, that button is just disabled? Maybe. My guess is that aside from things like that, where it's code development occurring right now, that Zen's going to work fine. But yeah, maybe we'll have to disable a button or two. I would like to say that Zen would be able to work with the latest of V2 and the latest of V3. I don't see the sense in trying to make Zen compatible with all of V2,
No,
just the most recent stuff.
I completely agree. So I think even if there are some crippled components for V2, this is just my opinion, we could take it up in the community, but even if there's some crippled capabilities for V2, and if you prereq, I'll say the last full release of V2, I think that would be reasonable. But again,
Yeah.
it can be discussed in the community.
I'm just guessing here in terms of like when did certain things stabilize, that there's probably not a big difference between V2.10 and V3.0 aside from that JCL thing. So I'm gonna imagine that Zen would be able to support from then till now, which is a pretty wide set of things. But I don't have the answer until we're actually out the door, I guess.
Understood. And I guess I invite others on the call that, represent what they're doing with Zowe, whether this is, a priority for them to have some capability in V2. But thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So it sounds like the answer to will Zen be available in V2 is maybe. It could be. And we'll keep everybody posted
Well,
on that.
and I would say probably some testing required. And if there's anybody out there that wants to help us test it, that would be a great opportunity.
Yeah. Validate it, test it. I had a question related to Zen. How does one navigate to that initial screen that was shown during the demo? How do you get there?
I'm wondering if you're asking about like how does one get Zen?
Sean, if I can just, I'd asked before, right? This is a desktop or laptop application that's running, right? So Zen would be downloaded, and what was shown is you've double clicked or whatever to open up that app on your PC desktop. That's where we started. True?
Yep. And it's based on this framework called Electron, which makes it quite portable. So the desktop's very broad here. It's going to work on Mac, Windows, and even if you have a Linux desktop.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Zen will be something that a user would find at zowe.org, would download it, install it. True?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, all true.
Okay.
And we've received some feedback that won't work for all users. Some users can't install software, and that's understood, and that's why we are improving install in so many different angles to cover all the users.
What about scenarios where customers stand up Zowe on, say, a sandbox, systems program or sandbox, and now they're ready to migrate it into the various, test and prod environments, LPARs, if you will. Would you use Zen to perform those functions?
That's a good question. Actually, this is a question that we were just thinking about in this week's ZOS squad call because we had such a user that was talking about this flow. And I think one of the challenges that people have currently is just a knowledge gap on the subject because when people want to do that flow, they want a minimum of moving parts. They want uh, the configuration to be as portable as possible. And it turns out that certain templating logic within Zowe.yaml is a great way to accomplish that. And putting your Zowe.yaml in a parm lib is a great way to accomplish that. But that it seems not many users know that those abilities even exist, even though they've been there for, I think, a year and a half now. So the challenge is really that our defaults don't highlight those. And that is one of the things that we covered in these slides is that we might change our defaults to be more geared for that scenario.
Okay.
And Sean, going back to the comment of downloading Zen or whatever, I mean, based upon your comments about the Zen capability sounds like may depend upon the release or version and release level of the Zowe that it's working with. So I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, there won't necessarily be one release of Zen, or maybe when we do the builds in future releases, we'll just have to be aware that the Zen that goes with it may be release dependent. True statement?
Sort of. So what I would say is that Zen is designed to be relatively low maintenance in that the forms that you see on the screen are derived from the schema and Zowe.yaml of the version that you are installing.
Got it.
So
Okay.
when you go to install a Zowe version and you do that extract on the system, we can pull back those elements to feed into Zen so that its pages dynamically match the version that you're looking at.
Got it. So it kind of learns what you've got and goes from there.
To a degree, but consider that, what if we want to make things more intelligent in the future? We want to provide some insight into your configuration. Like, did you set up your key rings right? Well, let us do a keyring listing for you or something. Maybe some of these additional insight or additional diagnosis that would make Zen excellent would depend upon a feature that has not yet been written. And if that's the case, then we become version dependent. So I think there's going to be a baseline that's going to be very flexible, but there might be some feature pages which depend on the version that you have.
Got it. Okay. Thanks for the clarification.
Well, thank you everybody for joining. Thanks to the presenters. We will see you all next week, maybe. We're going to be hosting an open office hours. Any component, any questions on the table? Yeah, and that will wrap up our series. Thanks for attending. Have a great day, everybody.